From the outside, people said we were the perfect trio. Vision, charisma, and structure. That's how investors described us when they wrote their first checks. Liam was the talker, the kind who could charm a room full of venture capitalists in under 5 minutes. Dana had the creative spark. She turned concepts into sleek products that people wanted to hold and show off. And then there was me, quiet, methodical, the one who made sure the company didn't collapse under its own ambition. I wasn't the face of the brand, and that never bothered me. I preferred late nights of code, legal filings, and system design over photo ops. My desk was always cluttered with contracts, mock-ups, and cold coffee cups. Liam and Dana loved the spotlight. I loved stability. But the truth was, without me, there wouldn't have been a company to show off in the first place. 3 years ago, when we were nothing but a fragile idea, I handled the technical framework, the intellectual property filings, the boring legal scaffolding that nobody else wanted to deal with. I stayed up for 72 hours once, fixing an API issue that would have killed our first client deal. Liam was in San Francisco pitching to investors. Dana was at a design retreat. I didn't mind. I was happy being the one behind the curtain until the curtain started to close on me. It began subtly, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Emails that once came to the 3 of us started going to just 2. Liam started saying things like, "We'll handle this one, you just keep things running." Dana, once my closest ally, stopped looping me into product meetings. When I asked about it, she said, "It's just investor talk, you wouldn't enjoy it." At first, I told myself it was fine. Every startup needs a front face, right? Maybe they were just trying to streamline communications. But the air shifted during our board meeting last March. The acquisition rumor had started circulating. A massive tech conglomerate wanted to buy us out for nearly $200 million. Everyone was buzzing. The boardroom was packed, cameras ready, a PR firm on standby, and then I saw the presentation. Slide after slide listed key leadership and executive decision makers. Liam's photo first, then Dana's, then the company logo. My name wasn't anywhere. I remember sitting there, forcing my expression to stay neutral as Liam bragged about his strategic partnerships and Dana detailed her design philosophy. They'd erased me from my own creation. Right there in front of the board, after the meeting, one of our senior advisors, an older man named Reiner, pulled me aside. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Of course," I said. Even though I wasn't He studied me for a moment, then muttered, "Don't let them write your name out of your own story." That night I sat in my apartment, staring at the first contract we'd ever signed, the founding document I'd drafted myself. I remembered how proud I'd been, back when we were just a handful of kids chasing an impossible dream. And as I reread the fine print, I felt something click in the back of my mind. They thought they were pushing me out. They thought I was too quiet to fight back. But they had forgotten something important. Something buried in those early documents that only I had ever truly understood. For the first time in months, I smiled. They could take the meetings, the interviews, the headlines. I didn't need those. I had something much more powerful, control, for a while. I convinced myself that what happened in that board meeting was just an oversight. Maybe my name had been left out by accident. Maybe the next presentation would be different. But weeks passed, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Liam and Dana had started holding executive sessions without me. They called them strategy syncs, but the decisions that came out of them were final product pivots, marketing budgets, even hiring approvals. I'd see the aftermath in email summaries, with polite phrases like "as discussed" or "per executive direction." That was my first official demotion. Silent, subtle, and perfectly executed. By the time I realized how deep it went, the walls had already closed in. Liam had appointed a chief strategy officer, someone loyal only to him. Dana had hired a new design director who reported directly to her. My responsibilities had been sliced into smaller pieces and quietly redistributed. Every week, there was less of my work to do, and fewer people asking my opinion. It wasn't until I walked into a meeting room one Tuesday morning and found someone else sitting at my desk that I understood. What was really happening? Oh, the new guy said with an awkward smile. Sorry, Liam said, this workstation was free. I stared at him for a moment, then nodded. No problem. But inside, something cracked. That afternoon, I went to Liam's office. He was on the phone, pacing like always, laughing too loudly. When he noticed me, he put the call on hold. Hey, buddy, he said, grinning. What's up? I just need to know where I stand, I said. Am I still part of this leadership team or not? He sighed, the kind of sigh people use when they think they're talking to someone beneath them. Listen, he said, leaning back. You've done amazing work, no question. But we're at a different stage now. The investors want a certain image, high energy, forward-facing leadership. You're more of a background guy. A background guy, I repeated. Yeah, like the backbone. Every team needs one. I wanted to laugh, but all I could do was nod. Right, I said softly. The backbone. 2 days later, an HR email arrived with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Updated role definition. It was written in sterile, polite language, outlining a consulting transition. I wouldn't be part of the executive board anymore, but I'd still support key operational processes as needed. No signature line. No title, no power. Dana didn't even call me. She just sent a text. You'll still have equity, okay? Let's keep it friendly. Friendly? That night, I sat alone in the dark office after everyone left, watching the glow of the city reflect off the glass. The building felt hollow, stripped of meaning. Every inch of it, the walls, the code, the patents had pieces of me in it. And yet, they'd made me invisible. But as I stared at the framed certificate hanging behind Liam's desk, a document I had drafted myself years ago, I remembered something. A quiet, forgotten detail in the company's earliest paperwork, when I had registered the intellectual property. I hadn't done it under the company name. I'd done it under the parent holding entity I'd formed at the start, before investors, before funding, before we'd ever hired a lawyer. I'd created it to protect our assets during the early chaos. No one ever asked about it again. No one cared, until now, because that little entity, that formality everyone had ignored, still existed. And on paper and in law I still controlled it. They thought they had written me out of the story. They hadn't realized I was still holding the pen. I spent the next few days quietly revisiting old files, contracts, and incorporation papers. Most of it was mundane notes I'd made during late-night work sessions, drafts of legal forms, early IP registrations, but hidden in plain sight was a thread I had almost forgotten, the parent holding entity, when we first formed the company. I had insisted that all intellectual property, patents, and core technology be transferred into a separate legal shell. Liam and Dana had protested, claiming it was unnecessary bureaucracy. But I knew the early investors, the volatile contracts. The constant risk of someone leaving, it was the only way to safeguard our work. At the time, they had rolled their eyes. Trust us, we'll handle the company, Liam had said, exuding confidence. Dana had waved her hand, saying, legal paperwork won't make the app better. But now, years later, that same legal shell was my ace. I reviewed the documents line by line. Every patent assignment, every software license, every critical piece of the company's infrastructure pointed back to me. In the hands of an outsider, it was a technicality, a footnote. But in the context of a $200 million acquisition, it was everything. Without my authorization, the deal could not move forward. The buyers wouldn't get the IP, the product couldn't be sold. The company, despite all the fancy branding and public relations, effectively couldn't exist without me. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of power. Not arrogance, not revenge, but clarity. They had been reckless, overconfident, blinded by their desire for recognition and glory. They had underestimated the quiet, meticulous person behind the scenes. I began mapping my strategy carefully. If I revealed my control too soon, they would fight me aggressively, try to negotiate around it, or worse, undermine the legal protections I held. If I revealed it too late, I could risk losing the leverage I had quietly accumulated. Timing would be everything. I also realized I had allies I hadn't considered. Reiner, the senior advisor who had subtly warned me, had always respected my judgment. He knew the inner workings of the company and had an eye for integrity. If I played my cards right, I could subtly steer him and the board toward understanding the true structure without alerting Liam and Dana prematurely. Most importantly, I started preparing my messaging. This wasn't about exposing betrayal with theatrics. It was about reestablishing authority with undeniable facts. Every email, every contract, every document was being organized, annotated, and double-checked. I wanted the story to be irrefutable. No opinions, no claims, just cold, undeniable ownership. That night, I sat alone in the office, the city lights flickering across the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same space that had felt hollow a week ago now pulsed with quiet opportunity. Every line of code, every patent, every system I had nurtured was part of my arsenal. I smiled for the first time in weeks. They had thought they were playing me. They had thought they had erased me, but they had forgotten one fundamental truth. You can push aside a person, but you cannot push aside the legal rights and structures they built. And in a deal worth $200 million, those rights were more powerful than any boardroom presentation, any charismatic pitch, or any glossy marketing campaign. The game had changed. And for the first time, I felt the thrill of being in control, not as the overlooked partner, but as the one who held the keys. The acquisition meeting was set for a Thursday morning. Liam and Dana had spent weeks preparing presentations, press materials, and scripts. I walked into the boardroom as usual, quiet, unassuming, carrying only a folder of documents that, to anyone else, would have looked like routine paperwork. But inside that folder lay the keys to the entire company. The room was already buzzing when I arrived. Investors in tailored suits, lawyers clutching briefcases, and a representative from the tech conglomerate sitting confidently at the head of the table. Liam's grin stretched ear to ear as he began the meeting. He presented slides with our projected growth, his voice rich with authority. Dana followed, showcasing new product lines with enthusiasm, sprinkling in statistics and charts that had been polished to perfection. And then came the final stage, the legal overview of the acquisition deal. The lawyer began to outline ownership of the companies, intellectual property, contracts, and critical technology. Liam's confident smile faltered as she pulled out the official filings. I leaned back, letting the room take in the information slowly. According to the filings, she said. Scanning the documents, all patents, trademarks, and proprietary systems are legally controlled under the entity registered by my name. A pause. A long, awkward pause. The air seemed to thicken. Investors glanced at each other. Liam's eyes widened and Dana's hand went to her mouth, a flicker of panic crossing her face. The lawyer continued calmly, oblivious to the tension. Therefore, the acquisition cannot proceed without the consent of the controlling party. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. Liam leaned forward, trying to mask his shock. There must be some mistake, he said, his voice tighter than usual. Those documents, they are not a mistake, I interrupted softly, holding up my folder. Everything here is accurate, everything here is enforceable. The filings were made years ago, when the company was first incorporated. All IP rights were assigned to the entity I control. The room went silent. Even the conglomerate's representative, who had looked completely at ease just minutes ago, straightened in his chair. This wasn't something he had anticipated. Dana tried to speak, her voice trembling slightly. But we've been running the company for years. The products, the clients, the deals, yes, I said evenly. And that is why it was important to secure the structure legally. You were running the operations, not the ownership. That distinction matters legally, financially, and strategically. Liam's usual composure had crumbled. He tried to interject, but the board chair held up a hand. We need clarity, she said firmly. Can you confirm that without my name's authorization, this deal cannot move forward? Yes, I said. The patents, the IP, the licensing all under my control. The company cannot be transferred without my consent. A tense silence filled the room. Everyone understood the magnitude of what I had just revealed. Liam and Dana's smugness had vanished, replaced by panic and disbelief. The very deal they had assumed was theirs to negotiate had slipped entirely out of their hands. Reiner, the senior advisor who had quietly warned me weeks ago, gave me a subtle nod. I knew then that I had the board's attention. Not because of charm, not because of charisma, but because of undeniable legal authority. For the first time in months, I felt completely in control, not an overlooked partner, not a sidelined consultant, but the one who held the keys to everything. And for the first time, the boardroom, the partners, and the investors had no choice but to acknowledge it. The tide had turned. And in a single moment, the story that Liam and Dana had tried to rewrite, the one that had erased me, was being rewritten by facts, law, and years of foresight. After the initial shock of my revelation, the room was filled with tense murmurs and rapid note-taking. Liam and Dana sat frozen, their carefully crafted narratives unraveling in real time. The board, which had been skeptical of me just weeks ago, now looked at me with a mix of curiosity and respect. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would define the rest of this negotiation. Calmly I spoke. "Let me clarify," I said, my voice steady. "This is not about personal grievances. This is about proper governance, the integrity of the company, and ensuring that the acquisition proceeds fairly for all parties. I have the authority to approve or deny this deal. The decision is now in my hands." The room fell silent again. Liam tried to interject, but the board chair raised a hand. "Let your name finish," she said firmly. I outlined the situation, step by step, showing the board the legal filings, the IP assignments, and the clauses that gave me ultimate control. I emphasized that the company's value depended on structured ownership, not just operational leadership. Every fact was clear, verifiable, and indisputable. There was no room for argument. Then I addressed the elephant in the room, the behavior of my partners. "I understand that some decisions may have been made without full transparency," I said carefully. "But moving forward, the company must be represented honestly. Anyone who does not align with these principles will not hold decision-making authority during this critical transaction." Liam's face turned pale. Dana avoided eye contact. I didn't need to shout or dramatize. The truth was already evident. The board deliberated briefly and came to a unanimous conclusion. Liam and Dana would no longer have unilateral control over negotiations. I would lead the discussions with the buyers with full authority to finalize terms. Their input could be considered, but the ultimate decision rested with me. It was a subtle, yet complete, reversal of the power dynamic. The people who had tried to push me aside were now sidelined themselves, and I held the reins. The conglomerate representatives, who had been cautiously polite until now, leaned in with renewed attention. They wanted clarity, speed, and security. I presented the deal on my terms, highlighting the company's assets, growth potential, and strategic value. I negotiated clauses that protected my interests, ensured fair compensation for all shareholders, and secured a leadership role for myself in the company's future. Throughout the negotiation, I remained composed. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The leverage I held, the IP, the legal control did the talking. The board and the buyers respected the authority I had established. By the end of the day, the deal was restructured, the purchase agreement finalized, and my role as the controlling party clearly defined. The $200 million acquisition would proceed, but under my guidance, not Liam and Dana's. After the final signatures were executed, I walked through the now empty boardroom. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. Liam and Dana lingered behind, silent, their faces a mixture of shock, humiliation, and begrudging respect. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The victory was quiet but absolute. Years of meticulous work, careful planning, and unwavering dedication had come to fruition. I had been pushed aside, underestimated, and treated as invisible. But in the end, the truth had emerged not as a dramatic reveal, but as an inescapable reality. I was no longer just a partner behind the scenes. I was the one who had controlled everything all along, and that control, quietly asserted, had rewritten the story of the company and my place within it forever. The weeks after the deal closed felt surreal. The $200 million acquisition had gone through flawlessly, but the atmosphere in the company was markedly different. Where tension and whispers had once lingered, there was now an unmistakable respect for the person who had quietly shaped the outcome. And that person was me. I walked into the office on Monday morning with a sense of calm. The usual chaos, the ringing phones, emails flooding in, and staff hurrying through corridors was the same. But this time, it felt like the company was aligned with its true center, and I was firmly at that center. Liam and Dana, who had tried to erase me from the narrative, were no longer running the show. They still had roles, but their authority had been carefully recalibrated. Decisions would pass through the lens of proper oversight, with the board and myself ensuring alignment with long-term goals. Their faces, once smug and dismissive, now carried a wary respect, sometimes bordering on awe. I spent the next few weeks consolidating control. Contracts, IP management, and executive decisions all moved under clear protocols. I implemented structured communication lines, ensuring no one could sidestep the authority that had been quietly mine for years. The company's culture shifted as well. People began to understand that leadership was more than charisma or public charm. It required diligence, foresight, and integrity. One afternoon, Reiner, the senior advisor who had first recognized my quiet strength, stopped by my office. He smiled, a subtle mix of pride and relief. "I always knew you'd be the one holding the cards," he said. "Glad the rest finally realized it." I chuckled softly. "They'll get there," I replied. "Eventually." But the most important lesson wasn't about victory over Liam and Dana, it was about recognizing one's own value. For years I had stayed in the shadows willingly, believing that being the backbone was enough. But now I realized that invisibility is only safe when combined with preparation and foresight. My quiet diligence had become my shield and my sword. The conglomerate, impressed with the seamless transition, entrusted me with oversight of the integration process. I now had not just financial control, but operational influence over the future of the company. Every negotiation, every strategic pivot, every new initiative passed through a framework I had meticulously crafted years before. I often thought back to the night I sat alone in the office, staring at the city lights and the founding documents I had drafted. Back then I had felt powerless. Today I understood that power doesn't always announce itself, it sometimes waits. Patiently, until the moment it matters most. Walking through the office, I noticed employees exchanging glances, nods of approval, subtle smiles. They didn't fully know the story behind the acquisition or the legal maneuvering that had secured it. They didn't need to. What mattered was that they trusted the person at the helm. And that trust was earned quietly, deliberately, and without theatrics. I sat at my desk one evening, the city lights shimmering like a mirror of the life I had built. The triumph wasn't in shouting, proving, or humiliating those who had doubted me. It was in the knowledge that I had safeguarded the company, ensured its future, and preserved my integrity in the process. The deal, the boardroom shock, the reversal, it was all a story now, but not a story of revenge. It was a story of foresight, resilience, and measured authority. The lesson was clear: underestimated, overlooked, or ignored, one who builds with care and foresight always retains power in ways others cannot see. Until the moment it counts. As I closed the folder containing the final acquisition documents, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The past attempts to push me aside were now irrelevant. I had emerged not only victorious but in full command, quietly proving that real power belongs to the one who understands it, protects it, and knows exactly when to wield it. And with that, the story of being pushed aside had finally ended on my terms, with poise and with the satisfaction of absolute control.